I'm delighted to have as a guest today, Ted Dintersmith, the EDspaces 2020 keynote speaker. EDspaces is the premier event to explore how the convergence of pedagogy, space, and technology affects facility design, its use, and ultimately student outcomes. Originally planned for Charlotte, North Carolina, the team from Ed Market Association has designed a very unique digital event that combines AI-suggested connections to people and products, along with top-notch educational seminars, virtual tours, and online networking opportunities. Just last week, Jim McCrary, President and CEO of EDspaces, allowed me an opportunity to sit in with others to see this demonstration, and it is exciting. I'm looking forward to that event very much. Noted author and education change agent, Ted Dintersmith, will be kicking off as keynote speaker for EDspaces Innovation Day on October the 28th, to then be followed with EDspaces main event taking place November 10th through the 12th. Ted will present what schools could be, small steps that lead to big changes, which shares the potential our educational institutions have. We focus on transformative learning experiences instead of test scores. A globally recognized voice in education, Ted's professional background spans technology, entrepreneurship, and public policy. His latest book, titled What School Could Be, Insights Inspirational from Teachers Across America, which are really highlights that are common elements of powerful learning experiences that he observed while visiting over 200 schools in 50 states. And he saw the way leaders can change schools by inputting the place of conditions that allow teachers to really thrive in teaching students. So Ted has been the executive producer of several films that have premiered at Sundance Film Festival, including the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, which you just have to see. It's a feature-length documentary on education. I've seen it twice. It's fabulous. So welcome, Ted. How are you?
I'm great to be here.
Wow, nice. Yeah, nice to see you again. We talked last week. So why don't we just get started? What do you see as the message that you would hope to bring to the EDspaces audience?
Well, I think there's a lot of focus right now on all the challenges going on with our schools. And I don't mean in any way, shape, or form to understate the challenges our country's facing with a pandemic and the economic consequences of it. But I think it's actually a remarkable opportunity to transform schools. It's something many, many people have for quite some time, for decades, said, boy, we need to do this. But there's always been a set of reasons that kept us from really stepping back and rethinking things. And now, like it or not, this massive disruption gives us no choice but to really step back and rethink things. And so, my fervent hope is we don't just say, let's grind our teeth and get through this horrible period so we can get back to normal, when in fact, normal wasn't really serving the long-term interest of our kids. So there's a saying, never let a crisis go to waste. And that's my hope. We in education, can take advantage of what the silver lining might be here and say, changes come our way. How do we make the most of it?
Well, I know all the attendees at EDspaces 2020 are really looking forward to what your message has to share, because there's a lot to be accomplished at this time. I guess I'd also like, if you could, I'm going to hold this up, share highlights of your book and film by the same name, Most Likely to Succeed. Tell us something about it.
Yeah, I got going on, I'm not a long-term educator. I have a business background, and I will readily admit that a lot of times when I'm introduced to educators and somebody says, this is a guy who used to be in business and now cares about education, it's like blood rains out of their face. I mean, that's not generally the best background to have to weigh into education. And I actually take the side of the educators there. I think a lot of business people feel, hey, I went to school, I'm an expert, let me just tell you what you should do instead of let me listen to you and learn from you about what works. But I could see, over my career, most of my career was in venture capital. So I'm working with high potential entrepreneurs who are creating all sorts of products and services to reshape our economy. And I think most of that time I thought is a good thing. And there are a lot of great things about that. But over time, I realized a couple things. One is it is dramatically changing what's required to pursue a fulfilling career. And the simple version of that is if it's routine, it will be done by a machine. And so to really be in a position to contribute to society professionally, you need to be creative and curious and bold. And a whole set of things that kind of the second observation is the set of things that adults need are what gets crushed out of them in school. And when you put those together, that escalating requirements to pursue a career, couple that with all the challenges to be an informed, responsible citizen, with an antiquated school model that was largely put in place to prepare, young adults for the industrial world. It's not just that we're not doing kids a favor, we're actually impairing their future. I'd add to that, just before people think I am one of those business guys, that it's not the teacher's fault. And when I deliver this message, and I largely attribute much of this to what teachers tell me, but they know what we should be doing. I mean, we do it to them, right? We have these data-driven policies. We have these initiatives with great sounding names like No Child Left Behind that largely have left almost all kids behind. And so it's not the teacher's fault. They fight hard and in a dedicated way every day for the best interest of their kids, but we're micromanaging them, not trusting them, not paying them enough, and basically holding them accountable to measures they have no say in and don't believe in. And I think that leads to lots of squandered potential in our country.
Well, parents want everything best for their child. So they want the best test scores so they can get to the best colleges or get out and get a job. But they're used to the prior educational model. Can you provide a contrast between that model and really what kids should be learning today?
Yeah, and I am one of those parents. I mean, my kids are far enough along that they're largely, they're 24 and 22. But if I backed up the clock 15 years ago, I probably thought that they should be in a school that looked pretty much like the school I was in, and that they should go to college just as I went to college, because that's an essential step. And that the key to success was higher test scores. So I am one of those parents, I am, kind of, if it's not broke, don't fix it, or at least was one of those parents. And it all sort of came to a head for me. Oh gosh, this goes back, more than a decade, but I was, went to our kids were in a middle school in Virginia, and they announced this was interesting. We have a brand new initiative to teach our kids important life skills. Come to an informal lunch to get a briefing on it. And my first reaction was, great. You're like, whoa, isn't this fabulous? A new initiative to teach kids important life skills. But as I started to think about it, I said, well, wait a minute. You're like, what's the purpose of school if it's not to prepare kids for life? And you realize to a very large extent, the purpose of school is to prepare kids for more school.
Yeah.
And
right.
It just keeps, we keep pushing, kicking the can down the road with that. And so, I started to look at this and just went from trusting to concerned to alarmed to quite alarmed. And so, I said, what can I do to make a difference? And my first step, I may have, who knows how much impact I have. I mean, I often wake up saying I'm having no impact. And so, so I'm modest about how many people listen to, or read what I write or watch what I film. But I at least say, hey, I've got a strategy. And I had seen a movie called, which many people had seen, called About School. Now I'm drawing a blank on it, but the Davis Guggenheim film that really put teachers in bad light. And I didn't buy that film. And so I said, the great thing about a film is it reaches people emotionally and it scales. If you do a great film, lots of people can see it. And so I did a 6-month search, found a director that I loved, a guy named Greg Whiteley, who recently won 3 Emmys for a series he did on Netflix, brought in Tony Wagner to help with the film, sort of as an advisor. And we did this great film, Most Likely to Succeed. And a lot of people think that the film is based on the book Tony and I wrote, but we didn't start writing that book until the filming was done. But we had worked together pretty closely, and we said, well, we should write a book together. And so we launched into that and wrote this book, which we gave the same title, Most Likely to Succeed, with the subtitle, Preparing Our Kids for the Innovation Era. And, you know, both of those, but the film, I'll brag a little bit about the film because it was Sundance, but it was also 25 major film festivals. And then, you know, one of the very recognizable streaming companies offered to buy the film after Sundance, and I turned them down. Huh. And instead we went directly to school communities. So I hired a team and made the film available on that basis because I felt like the power of the film was bringing people together, looking at each other, spending 90 minutes watching the film and then having really thoughtful discussion. And one thing about the film that I give great credit for it doesn't prescribe. It doesn't say everything you're doing now is wrong, you should be doing this. Instead, it just gives you a great look at kids working on ambitious cross-disciplinary projects, working as teams, having a chance to fail and fail and fail, and in some cases, ultimately pull something out that they're proud of. And in other cases, one of the key kids in the film fails, you know, on exhibition night. And you know, and that's sort of life. And we showed teachers that were trusted to teach to their passions and expertise. But Greg went out of the way to say it's too new, it's too early, who knows, everybody's got to make up their own mind. When he could have said, I actually kind of encouraged him to say, this is better, why isn't everybody doing it? But instead it was sort of inviting the audience to make up their own mind. And I've now done, you know, in the film, I haven't done all of them by any means, but the film's probably been screened in 10,000 schools, 35 different countries. I've done a couple hundred community events with the film. And instead of people throwing tomatoes at us for saying, you know, like, I don't believe this, because we respect their ability to make up their own minds, it's just sort of invited really great, thoughtful discussion, which I think we need more of in our country.
Interesting. Well,
Waiting for Superman. That's the film I was blanking on.
Oh, that's what it is.
Now, a lot of people saw that, and it basically said if your kid doesn't go to a charter school, that kid's, you know, drawing the short end of the stick. And, you know, I visited a lot of mainstream public schools and a lot of charter schools, and that premise I think we should just reject. There's some great schools of all types and some okay schools of all types, and some schools that really need to get in gear of all types.
Well, the prior educational model that we all have gone through was very prescribed, very structured. And in our conversation, you shared with me that the world is full of ambiguity. So if we're going to prepare students for that type of world, how do you go about selecting or retaining or attracting teachers based on their expertise and passion for teaching the kind of skills that are required in real world applications today? How do you find that teacher?
Yeah, well, when you look at the types of learning environments that we do films on, that we write about, or that I write about in a little bit of Most Likely to Succeed, and a lot in my book, What School Could Be, you know, one of the things that runs through that is that teachers are so energized, right? I mean, teachers enter the profession to engage and inspire kids. They don't enter the profession to be held accountable to be on a certain page of a lesson plan on a certain time of day in October. I mean, you know, like, that's not why something is a profession. Teachers have a long view. I mean, they know they're preparing kids for life, not for next week's quiz. And so when you start to realize that it may not appeal to all teachers, and that's fine with me. One of the things that I keep front and center is, and we do a lot of this in education where somebody tells teachers what they have to do. And generally the teachers voice in it, they don't many times believe in it. And at a certain point, you just get numb to that, you know, like, this is the new math, we have to do it. This is this year's, you know, priority of the year. It's very different. You extend trust and respect to teachers and say, not this is what you have to do, but we'll support you if you want to do something like this. And we do a lot of work. The film sort of set the tone of this resource called the Innovation Playlist, and a website, whatschoolcouldbe.org, where we do lots of video work to capture great practices in the field. So these aren't our good ideas, but these are practitioners' good ideas. And we don't say you have to do this. We say, watch this. They're all, like 15-minute, short
Yeah.
perspectives on how can you spark curiosity in your students. And when we work with principals or superintendents, and believe me, they breathe this huge sigh of relief when we tell them the goal here shouldn't be go to your school tomorrow and say every teacher has to. No, that's a bad model, I think. It's a very different model when you say, I'd like everybody to spend 15 minutes watching this, and then who's up for trying it? So nobody has to do what they don't believe in. But, and this is important, every school has these teachers just itching to do something different. Teachers that just say, no, this isn't what I entered the profession to do. This doesn't respect my expertise. I would love to get my kids excited about learning something they care about. I would love to help guide them in terms of how they connect that to the real world. I'd love to figure out ways we can assess it based on real mastery instead of a bubble test. That energizes a lot of teachers. And at a time when I think many teachers are demoralized, and it's our fault. I mean, we've done it to them. We've created circumstances that don't treat them as the professionals they deserve to be treated as.
Well, technology is driving so many things in business, of course, now in education, and it's growing at an exponential function. So taking into consideration, let's say, artificial intelligence, what is your prediction for where jobs will be in the future? Say 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or what jobs will be eliminated?
Yeah. Well, I'd say every job will be changed. I would say any job that is basically routine, whether it's routine physical task or routine cognitive task, will be gone. I mean, it's to make it visible on the physical front. I think within 20 years, a single agile robot would win almost every event in the Summer and Winter Olympics. And so you think about that's what a robot could do. How could any human outcompete that, particularly if robots are on a cost declining curve and they don't require benefits and they don't call in sick and they, a bunch of different things. So routine physical gone 10 to 20 years for sure. And cognitive, I think we underestimate, every time developers, AI specialists set their sights on some task, even something we think of as being creative and conceptual. So they say, can we develop an AI program that would beat the world's best chess player? Boom, done.
Right.
The world's best Go player, done. You put anything out there, which means, by the way, that if it's a type of professional responsibilities done by lots of people in a certain way, that's a great market opportunity for, startup companies to go after, or the bigger companies. And so what I think is important to realize is that while the number of jobs you apply for may be going down, the number of career paths you can create is unlimited, right? And that gets back to that point of ambiguity, where if we tell kids year in and year out in school to basically do what you're told, in college, it's like you get some choice, you pick a major, but then you're stuck with a whole bunch of distribution requirements and prerequisites. And then you sign up for certain courses where basically it's all laid out for you. And you get to the end of that, and you're 20 some odd years old with a college degree, which we view as a success outcome. But so many of those kids are drowning in student loan debt and basically been programmed. I call them go fetch a dog biscuit kids, like, tell me what to do, come back, I did it, give me my grade. And honestly, that type of kid, I mean, I'd rather deal with AI than that type of kid. And I think most people would. And so there's a quote I use in my talks from a senior exec at Apple Computer, who said, we've decided any employee that needs a boss is no longer employable. And what's he saying? He's saying, we want to hire people who can identify ways to make us better, to better serve our customers, come up with initiatives to do it and run with them, drawing on resources, checking in with the work colleagues, but basically carry it forward without having to be, micromanaged through every step of that. And which then says, like, well, why would we not want to be doing that in school? And particularly, why wouldn't we want to be doing that during this time of the pandemic? Because, if in fact the essence of school is just taking notes, memorizing, and saying it back on an exam, good luck. I mean, that's what AI does perfectly. And so I think many ways, the measure of success historically in school calls for us to encourage kids to get good at something the world doesn't care about or cares less and less about going forward. And in the process diminishes the very things that, adults are going to need to thrive. And you look at like what any SAT test prep coach says, the two main messages that a tutor for SAT score, tests give to somebody who's paying $100 to $1,000 an hour for this advice. They say, if it's hard and it's going to take a bunch of time, skip it. Well, that's a great life lesson. Never, ever think creatively. These tests are designed to be scored by a computer, so think formulaically. Like if it can be graded by a computer, it can be done by a computer. And if we're getting kids good at things that can be done by a computer, good luck.
Well, what's so fascinating is today, students are competing on a global stage, global workforce. And since technology is driving so much change, for instance, SpaceX with their Starlink satellite program will be changing the way the internet functions. It's going to bring more competition in. So how do our students today compare to other students in different countries? Are there any interesting stats?
Yeah, well, other countries, there's this wide tapestry, right? And one thing I always take issue with is when people bemoan the state of US education and they say, look, we're in the middle of the pack on test scores. And then they take it one step further. And I find this one so interesting. And they sort of add this snarky aside that the only category US kids lead the world in is that their confidence that they actually know it. But look at their scores and they don't. And somehow confident kids is viewed as a negative. But it isn't, right? I mean, don't we want confident kids? Because a confident kid takes on challenges and sort of says, I can figure it out, right?
Right.
And guess what? They can figure it out. Like the endless amounts of drilling on low-level math procedures that no adult ever uses, I think tells a big story about what's valued in school. Kids are spending endless hours doing something that photomath on their phone does instantly, error-free, and free, right? Just put your phone over the expression and it resolves it. Closed form integral, done. Factory polynomials, done. Curve fitting, done. It's all done. And yet we never have time to teach kids how to use it, right? And so the opportunity for a country, for a state, a district, a school, is to move beyond that and say, what is it that computational resources, that machine intelligence, what are the things that does really well? And how can we equip our kids to take advantage of that? But that sounds so loud. I think when I say that, maybe I didn't say it as artfully as I could, but when I say it, I think most people agree. Shouldn't our kids be equipped to take advantage of the bountiful powers of computational resources that are available instantly and for free? That seems reasonable. But it's the exact opposite, right?
Right.
It's the exact opposite. Right. Shouldn't our kids learn to collaborate with others, to figure out ways they can work together to accomplish something that none of them on their own could do? That seems like it ought to be a priority in school, but in school that's called cheating. And you start to peel it back and you say, what if? And it sounds a bit like hyperbole, but I don't think so. And I visited a lot of schools. Is what if we're actually pushing kids to get good at something that is of diminishing to arguably no importance to them as an adult, and in the process crushing out of them the very competencies they're going to need? That's a big set of alarm bells. And I think we need to take that to heart. And then my next what if is, what if our classroom educators know what works, but botching things up, gobbling up the works, are data-driven policymakers? Like the people that just say, I don't really care what the kids are learning or even whether they're learning, as long as I can measure it. Which then leads you to low-level math micro tidbits, because they're perfect fodder for these standardized tests. And I've got a pretty strong math background. So I'm not bragging here, but I know a bit about it. And the reality is, most of what kids do in high school math, no adult ever You know, I mean, I took calculus, you know, like I could do hyperbolic cosine transformation. You know, I knew how to do integration, you know, by parts, but it's all done computationally.
Right.
It's like saying every kid should learn how to master the slide rule. And you say, well, you know, many people now hearing this will say, well, like, what's a slide rule? But you know, a slide rule for a period of time was essential, you know, to people taking on engineering challenges. But it's gone today. You know, it was replaced by the HB12C and then a whole set of computational resources, now the smartphone. But why don't we think that way? I mean, I often contrast the way we approach education with something that's not viewed as terribly innovative, which is the division of motor vehicles, right? But I mean, if the division of motor vehicles were, you know, if you liken math curriculum to the division of motor vehicles, you would still, for a kid to get a driver's license, they still have to crank start a Model T engine. You know, like the DMV has moved past that. We don't even have to parallel park anymore. Nobody has to learn how to drive a stick shift, you know, because they realize the world's changed and some of these things just aren't going to have to be done by most kids driving a car. You know, that's not happened in math. And
Yeah.
so math weeds people out and makes a lot of people feel stupid. But, you know, the Steve Levitt, I talked to him a couple of months ago, the Freakonomics author who does a podcast. They've got a big following of techie, nerdy people in the Freakonomics universe. So they ask him, how many of you on a regular basis use the 4 pillars of high school math, you know, algebra, trig, geometry, or calculus?
Yeah.
I mean, the high water mark was 4% for geometry, because some people are in construction or in architecture or whatever and might have to use it. But if 4% is a high water mark, and I've spent 6 years trying to find somebody who uses high school calculus professionally, I've found no one. You know, what's the point of it, right? I mean, big deal if it's easy for test designers and ranks kids. What's the point? You're like, we can do better.
Right. The U.S. has been built on the middle class. And as part of the Industrial Revolution, based on the skills that were being learned in school and as they were being applied in industry, the middle class was certainly a strong anchor for the economy. Today, with the changes with technology and what companies are looking for in terms of skill sets, my guess is that middle class is going to be changing. So as technology rises, the skills rise, where will the middle class be as, if you will, the boat in the ocean? As the water goes up, the boat goes up. Will everybody go up with it?
Yeah. Well, this whole issue of social mobility is so interesting. And I think people haven't thought about this topic particularly. I'll generalize a bit. But anyway, I think there's a general sense that education levels America's playing field. And my view on it is education tilts an already very tilted playing field. And the more we buy into everybody needs a 4-year college degree to have any chance of succeeding in our economy, the worse things become. You know, I've been telling an article, How College is Ruining America, which, well, I'm sure the comments section would be like exploding with criticism. But let me walk you through it, right? If you look at, you know, early childhood, who gets lots of great early childhood support? The rich kids. Who gets totally hosed by that? The really poor kids. K through 12, you know, this Supreme Court decision that people don't, you know, spend much time talking about, but Rodriguez versus San Antonio basically says it's just fine in America for local property taxes to fund the bulk of you know, half, it turns out, of school funding. So that means the rich kids get the most and the least kids get the least. So is that leveling the playing field? Absolutely not. When I visit a lot of schools, you know, you go to these schools in the rich communities and then, I mean, it's like, whoa, this place is beautiful. And then you go to schools in the poor areas and it's like, whoa, this is a building that should have been torn down a long time ago. And it ripples through to the teachers. You know, the teachers don't get the support, you know, like it's very difficult. My heart goes out. I mean, we should be idolizing teachers to go into these poor areas and teach. And we should be making sure more people that come out of those poor areas get the educational background so they can teach, you know, kids that can relate to them in some ways. But, you know, like they're not supported. They're working in really tough circumstances. and they're held accountable to these test scores. And right, we don't recognize the fact that the 5 and 6 year olds in the rich areas have nannies that speak Mandarin and have been on an iPad doing motion math from age 4. And every car drive is, SAT test prep. And the kids in poor schools start at age 5 and 6, and they're behind on test scores, which leads to no child left behind, which leads to, hey, here's our brilliant answer. Let's bury these kids with worksheets so they can catch up. And they just get bored. And I don't blame them. They should get bored. And the teachers constantly get labeled as, subpar teachers in failing schools, when many of those teachers are doing the most remarkable work, which then leads you to college and its overhang. Because one of the things that's happened is we've turned K through 12 into college ready, right? There are occasional career academies, but they're often viewed as for those kids, the kids that couldn't cut it academically, let's send them off for a last chance, path in a career academy, CTE. But you know what? When you visit those places, there's incredible learning going on. And the educators in those schools are remarkable. And I actually argue that all kids should be doing a lot more hands-on. And in my talks, I use this, it's not high production quality and it's not our work, but a long-term tenured professor at MIT did a 2-minute video. People can look it up on graduation day at MIT. And he wanted to make the point that MIT graduates have actually learned very little science or engineering. And I use it in my talks because you watch, and they go to graduate after graduate at MIT, and they give them a light bulb wire and battery and say, can you light up the light bulb? And these students are all like indignant. You're like, here I am. You're like, I'm a graduate of the most prestigious science and engineering institute in the world. Of course I can light up a light bulb with a wire and battery. And then they can't. Right. And the point I make is that they got 5 on AP Physics and 5 on AP Calculus BC and 800 on their SATs and one of the 6, 7, 8% to get into MIT, and then 4 years there taking a bunch of engineering courses. But it was all in the world of memorizing Coulomb's law or Kirchhoff's law and playing around with the parameters and being able to shove them around and get the right answer when you're given 3, get the, solve for the 4th unknown without making a math or units mistake. But they don't understand what it means. Whereas the kid that's worked as an apprentice for a master electrician, or, anybody that's been involved with the trades, they'll light up the light bulb instantly, right? I mean, this is like easy. Right. Actually realize that the applied is a great window to the theory, but the theory is largely an abstract, bubble that has no connection to the applied. I think we'd start saying, all kids should be taking more pragmatic learning, have more pragmatic learning experiences. And one of my dares, and this, I always look for and occasionally come up with, look for cost-effective ideas that could just change everything. And so imagine if in middle and high school, we just peeled back college-ready content that is only there to prepare kids for a college application and for poorly taught, irrelevant college courses. And said, let's spend some of that time letting each kid develop at least one practical proficiency. And then with support in the summer, whether it's an internship or freelance, with some adults that can really help them, demonstrate that they can make 2x, 3x the minimum wage or more. I mean, what a gift to give an 18-year-old. It's actually, if they go to college, it's the best possible scholarship, because in 10 hours a week in summers, they can cover most of the cost of college. And you realize, like, why wouldn't we do that? And right now, the reason is it's easy to find a standardized test based on Coulomb's law and Kirchhoff's law. How do you test in a standardized, compare a kid in Omaha to a kid in Wilmington, North Carolina, based on, can you light up a light bulb with a wire and a battery? Well, you have to observe it. You have to have somebody there to see it, right? And so, we all too often let the testing dog let the testing, easy for me to say, let the testing tail wag the learning dog, right? We have our kids study what's easy to test and not what's important to learn. And we disrespect forms of hands-on, and it ripples through. 2/3 of Americans don't have a college degree. And we've seen during the pandemic who the essential workers are. And it's generally not the university professor, sorry to step on toes, but it's often somebody working really hard in an important profession that makes a positive contribution to our community. And we need to stop viewing that as being anything less than a fully contributing, respected member of society. I mean, that's really important for our society. And I think we need to bake that into our priorities in schools. And, because, like, how many kids are really good with their hands or have a quote unquote soft skill that's exceptional? Kid that's really a great speaker or can interact and ask great questions of adults or a million different things.
Mm-hmm.
How many kids have those gifts and talents, but get told year in and year out in school that they're not proficient, that are not the gifted kid? Well, those kids have remarkable gifts. And if we had a broader landscape in school and lots of ways for kids to express excellence and develop it, they're all going to be better off. Society's going to be better off. And I think that's the transformation we need to make.
Well, Ted, you've been in over 200 schools. So as we're considering how to redesign the learning environment, what have you seen are some of the significant features that need to be incorporated into these new learning environments? Does it have to do with collaborational mobility, healthy environment, natural light, just to name a few? What kind of resonates with you?
Well, there's complexity here for sure. But I always feel like, and I'm a big believer in just getting started, right? Just get started. I'm a pitifully awful ice skater. I mean, the last time I went ice skating, I ended up in the emergency room, and that's a long time ago. So bear with me when I use this, but I like the hockey expression, just get the puck on the ice, just get going. And I think too often we say we're going to change things, but then we say, let's put it in a strategic plan. And then, that's where innovation goes to die. And so we have this set of resources called the Innovation Playlist, which are sort of core foundational elements, but delivered in a way that you can try it agilely. I'll just set aside 20 minutes this month for kids to ask thought-provoking questions, or I'll spend one class period this month for kids to be able to go deep on something they care about, or there are a whole set of these things that sort of begin to build momentum and open people's eyes up to what's possible. And one of the things that I observe, it's one of the things I love about architects, is that whenever we're in discussions, more than almost any other profession, they totally get. I think they get this vision of a reimagined education process, and I think it's partly that architecture schools value real portfolios. I think it's partly that training is based on real and not, they're not. I don't think I have no background, but what they tell me is, that to complete an architecture major or to get an advanced degree in architecture, it's not based on multiple choice questions about when Frank Lloyd Wright was born, but it's like, show me your design, and they value creativity, and they value, the traits that actually serve people well. And so, when you see, it sounds like it's kind of an aside, but, back to the film Most Likely to Succeed, we featured this one we started filming in 12 different places. We had no idea where the film was. It's like a documentary, right? When you start a documentary, the subjects take you where you go, not you decide where you're going to go. And so we started at 12 schools and then ended up doing most of the filming at this school in San Diego, High Tech High. And here's what was interesting, right, is that their space doesn't look like any other school space. And it's a place for our film team. The light was great. The classrooms are not, walled off, but they have kind of glass partitions and wide open doors. One of the things that happened, and they realized, is other schools, when they go into the room, they have to knock on the door, open the door, bring in 4 people because we had a big team, lots of disruption, and suddenly nobody behaved naturally. The students were playing to the camera. The teacher is aware it's being filmed. It doesn't make for good footage. It doesn't capture what's really going on. And High Tech High is just awash with visitors, and people come in and out of these classrooms all the time. Students come out all the time. Teachers are coming and going. Kids are largely doing things they're motivated to do. So you don't have to have a teacher there all the time telling them what to do. But the space, to a very large extent, drove and influenced the learning. Because they did start with the space. They found an abandoned naval facility, and instead of spending a lot more money to partition it off, they sort of said it's a wide open space, let's preserve the best of it. So our film team could go in, paid attention, so they captured kids behaving as they normally would. The film, I think people look at it as just visually, incredibly appealing, but I think it delivers this sort of, because as I said, where the film doesn't go out of its way to hit you over the head with you reach this conclusion, but you realize when kids are not in walled areas, in confined spaces, and it's one of the things we deal with in pandemic, where it's 6 feet social distancing and plexiglass shields and everything else. But if kids are invited to interact with each other dynamically, and there's a sort of liberating sense of freedom in the school's physical configuration, that carries forward to the learning. And so, and that's a place you can start. I mean, as I say, once you start somewhere and start to get positive results and then share those broadly across your community. And so I think one of the things that I find quite interesting in the pandemic and what we hear from people is they say, what are different ways we can configure the space so it's safe, but also leads to great learning. And so you'll find like pop-up schools at a local, playground, or repurposing the gym for more open spaces. And you realize like if you do that, suddenly a lecture model, even if you wanted to, you can't do that. So then you start to say, well, if that's how we're meeting, how are we going to make the most of that? And it's the classic one thing leads to a lot of other things. And so, but I think the important thing is a bias toward action, because it's all too easy to just say we're going to get to it someday,
right,
and not get to it. And so any kind of little things can often lead to big things. And I'm just a big fan when people say, hey, we're going to get going. You're like, this won't be perfect. We may change it, but the step we're taking, not next year, not next month, but tomorrow morning, we're doing this. And we're going to learn from it and share those lessons and see where it goes from there. As I say, if you want kids to be good at dealing with ambiguity, you've got to introduce some ambiguity into schools. And I think we need to model the characteristics we want our kids to have in the way school is organized.
Well, I would venture to say that in those kind of adaptable spaces, mobile technology, furniture, you probably don't even see the same furniture that you saw in the last era in those spaces. So I would think furniture must play a huge role in adaptability. Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, I think when you things like that send a message. I mean, like it's not the physical configuration of space. When I visit so I'll hop over one lane and then come back. But I visit a lot of high schools. I generally stay away from the well-off areas, just because, I've got the luxury kind of to go where the kids are, and not that many US kids are in the well-off areas. So I'll visit them occasionally, but I like to be representative. But it doesn't matter whether it's a well-off or a poor, it really doesn't matter. When you visit those schools, the physical space is largely defined at the high school level by college pennants, by posters that basically say, you can do it, you too can go to college. And I'll ask the schools, well, do you celebrate a kid who enlists in the military? Oh, we should, but we don't. Do you celebrate a kid who gets a job they're really excited about with the local car repair facility? No, maybe we should, but we don't. But they'll celebrate a kid who gets a college acceptance. And they don't take responsibility for whether the kid's going to a college that's really going to care about the kid. They don't take responsibility for whether the kid finishes. They don't take responsibility for how much the kid's taking out in student loan debts. They just are very excited. College signing day. Oh, we did this % of our kids went to college. Oh, all of our kids went to college. And you realize, instead of respecting all paths, we heavily weighted, and it's reinforced by the physical space. When you walk around that school, you can't avoid the message that this is what you should do. And if you don't, somehow you're less than. And I think it's very, back one hop, I'm in the room and they said, this is your fixed space to sit in. and all eyes point to the front, and it conveys a message going to come from the adult at the front of the room, taught the kids who have a way to take notes. Then they take home and memorize. And then the exam, which are usually fact-based exams. And that's a perfectly effective model for how to help our kids. But it isn't, right? Because when I ask for evidence that kids who study, who engage in the quote unquote learning that way, what's your evidence that it sticks? Do you ever re-administer your exams down the road,
Right.
2 months, 3 months later? Do you ever give them pop quizzes on what they studied last month instead of right now? And when people do, which is rare, the results are quite telling and discouraging. I mean, the kids don't remember it. Most people don't want to do that. And I think it's because they're afraid of what they'll learn. And so if it's really more like writing an essay in the sand on a windy beach instead of deep retained mastery, my question is, what's the point, right? And why are we surprised that 2/3 of adults in America can't name the 3 branches of government or can't balance their checkbook, or on and on? The most simple things you would think everybody will have learned by the time they're 18.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot. Ted, do you have any final remarks or challenges that you'd like to share with the attendees of this year's EDspaces conference?
Yeah, I would say this, is that I am completely convinced that the future of a kid, the future of a community, and the future of a nation will be defined by the choices we make in school. And so if we continue to say it's all about outcompeting your classmates, doing work you have no voice in and don't see any point to, and in the process getting good at things that are irrelevant, I think we're sowing the seeds of our destruction. And arguably, we're already seeing the consequences of that. That said, if we have the vision and the courage to reimagine education, if kids are working on initiatives that help them develop essential competencies, where they see that their efforts and their ability to learn how to learn and their ability to connect what they're doing to affecting positive change in their world, if that's the essence of school, we're going to see a lot of kids come out of school able to, and fired up to make positive contributions to society, to not view their mission as outcompeting the person next to them, but working with and respecting the person next to them. And I think we could be off to the races, but I think it's all on the line. And I do worry that if our attitude is we'll get to that someday, if all those issues that we talked about a few minutes ago about the inequities are not really things we should address, that it's just fine that the rich have the best opportunities and the poor get hosed. If that's our attitude, I don't know. I think we're not doing the things we need to do to help kids. We're not preparing kids for their futures, and we're not creating the kind of society I think we're all going to be proud to be part of. And so the stakes are really high. I have a great deal of trust and confidence in our teachers in the field if we just empower them to do what they believe should be done. But I don't think we can bookmark this and say, great conference, but now let's get back to normal. I hope everybody who participates leaves and says, no, this isn't going to be a footnote in a strategic plan, but here's what we're doing tomorrow to get on our way.
Yeah. Well, Ted, I'd like to personally thank you. It was very enjoyable. I've read your books. I've seen some of the films, and I encourage everybody to look at those. There's a lot to be learned. I guess I'd just like to end by saying I'm Dennis Young, founder of issueseneducation.net. We're the leading forum for engaging thought leaders like Ted on topics that will transform education. So for Ted and myself, both of us, we look forward to an exciting EDspaces conferences this year. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.